Hello, everyone. I'm here today with New Zealand astrologer Alan Clay, who's now a Canberra astrologer. And he's going to be giving a talk for the Astrology Collective on May 21st entitled Orcus, Transmitting Shadow and into Light. And I'm really looking forward to that. So how are you today, Alan?
I'm very good, thank you. Yes, I'm now settled in Canberra, my new home. So very good today.
It must be a big change. It's like going from one universe to another, huh?
It is. Yes, yes. I mean, I grew up in Auckland, in New Zealand, sort of by the beach there, and it's a wonderful place. But I've got family over here, and so now I'm sort of happier, close to family.
So you tell me where you've grew up. Tell me a little bit about yourself. A little bit about your background.
Well, I'd say I grew up in Auckland. What can I say about that? Yeah, I grew up near the beach there, and I was the sort of child that we had a wharf on our beach. People used to fish off it and so on. I used to go down and sit on the wharf and sort of gaze out across the water as my way of sort of settling myself and just settling into sort of the magic of being, which I think of as Haumea these days. But it was an important sort of contemplative space for me. I've got a lot of water in my chart. And, sort of
I was going to ask, with that kind of background, do you have anything in Pisces?
I have my moon in Pisces.
Yeah, I just had that Pisces feel, just the way you were talking.
I've just had Neptune on my moon for the past few years, so very.
Yes, I've had Neptune on my Pisces ascendant for some time, so I empathize. So most people, when they're children, have some ideas about what they'd like to be when they grow up, and sometimes they do, sometimes they change completely. Was there anything that you can think of that when you were a child that you saw, this is what I want to be when I grow up?
So I think most of my thinking about what I want to be when I grow up was sort of conditioned or derived from my parents. My mother was a teacher, a university lecturer, and in education, and my father was an engineer. So I variously wanted to be a teacher or an engineer as I grew up. As you know, I'll tell a bit of a shaggy dog story here, but most of my life I've worked as a clown teacher, as a clown and a clown teacher. We don't understand clowns very well in our Western society. It's really, clowns work on a psychic level. It's an emotional art form, and they work on a psychic level to release tension in audience members. I have Orcus conjunct my south node in Cancer in my 6th house. So, and Orcus is about transmuting shadow into light. It's actually, Orcus is one of Pluto's brothers. Orcus, Ixion, and Pluto all orbit in the same basic orbit. They're all, which is the same as Neptune's orbit. They're all in gravitational sync with Neptune. And for every 3 orbits of Neptune, Orcus does 2 orbits, and so does Pluto and Ixion. So they're linked gravitationally with Neptune, which gives them a spiritual dimension. And yeah, so Orcus conjunct the south node, release in Cancer, releasing emotional tension, transmuting shadow into light. That's basically what a clown does. Yeah, as I grew up, I wanted something a little more meaningful than that. That's a wonderful, meaningful thing, but not quite so much for me. So now I'm an astrology teacher. So I did become a teacher in the end. So
I had a friend who actually went down to Florida in the U.S. and attended a clown college in Florida.
Oh, awesome! Yeah.
So I'm kind of familiar with that vicariously through there. And I know we have two types of people in the world. In my experience, we have those that love clowns and those that are terrified of them.
Yeah.
And I think that has something to do with the impact that clowns have on their shadow, you know?
Exactly. And control. Can we release control? Clowns are always asking us to release the control. They're taking us into a space which is chaotic, undefined, and that's beautiful if you can release yourself to that, because you discover new things and let go of the old shadow, essentially. But if you're afraid of the shadow and hanging on to control as a result, then clowns are scary.
Yeah. So how long have you been interested in astrology, and what drew you to it?
Since my teenage years, I got into it, and really, I'm a Scorpio sun, and I've got Pluto in the 8th, so I'm sort of more into. I needed to find what was behind the sort of normal reality that we're living in. I needed to find some deeper meaning. I think I've done it through astrology.
So are you primarily self-taught, or do you have a teacher or teachers?
No, I'm self-taught. I'm relentlessly self-taught. I've got Ixion as this other brother of Pluto that I've been talking about, and I've got Ixion in the 10th house, and Ixion sort of wants to do it his own way. So
I'm very, very familiar with the concept. I'm primarily self-taught. I've actually never taken an astrology class, although I did have a mentor for many years who taught me a lot through our friendship. So
that's
the
very
pluses and minuses of being self-taught, you can direct your own path, but sometimes you may miss something that you might have. So you may find out later, oh, I didn't see that the first time around. So
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, no, totally.
So now I understand, I read in your bio that you were influenced by Dane Rudyard, who was a remarkable astrologer. I had the good fortune of corresponding with him for a few years near the end of his life. And he was, when I went from astrology to deeper astrology, he was probably my hero, so I do understand that. Were there any other astrologers that you feel had a big impact on you?
I mean, I think Dane was my hero for many years, and I read all his books, and I wish I'd had a chance to correspond with him and so on. But and what he did, for everyone who doesn't know him, I mean, what he did was he took Jungian psychology and put it together with astrology and created something called humanistic astrology, which all of our psychological modern astrology is derived from. And so that was the beauty of it. So from my point of view of sort of understanding people and myself, that was a really wonderful opening. I mean, Robert Hand and Stephen Arroyo back at the start were important for me. Your work's been very important for me. I mean, you really have opened me to the centaurs and the dwarfs through your mailing list and all of your research that you've done. So that's really been very important for me.
That whole thing is a labor of love on my part. So I'm very happy to hear that somebody gets tuned in on it. That's really great.
No, it's been wonderful. It's been a wonderful labor of love. I encourage you.
Thank you. So I see you call yourself a transpersonal astrologer. Can you, in a couple of words, a couple of sentences, define what you mean by that?
Yes, very sort of rarefied type of astrologer, but I think more and more going to be coming into the mainstream. Well, again, referencing Dane Rudger, so he started with humanistic astrology, but then towards the end of his career, he moved into transpersonal astrology, which is what he called sort of when he was working on Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So the inner planets are out to Saturn. They were the visible planets back in the day. And then we discovered over the last 200 years, we've discovered 3 new planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And he sort of talked about they were the transpersonal planets. Inside Saturn, they're the personal planets, and outside of Saturn, they're the transpersonal planets. Now, recently, we've discovered another 11, let's say, planets, the dwarf planets. There's more of them, but there's 11 big ones, and so they are also the transpersonal planets. And because I focus on the planets beyond Saturn, I call myself a transpersonal astrologer.
Okay. So basically, personal is being the Sun, Moon, Mercury through Saturn.
Yeah.
And so when you're cross Saturn's ring, past knot, basically, you go into the transpersonal realm, and there we find Uranus on out.
We do. And it's not that those planets, we tend to think of those outer planets as being collective unconscious influences. I'm kind of redefining that in my work because, when many astrologers believe that when new planets are discovered, it represents a new aspect of our consciousness, of our personality that's available to us. With Uranus, we got the intuitive sort of area. With Neptune, we got the more spiritual. It became sort of part of our lives. And with Pluto, we got the psychological understanding of our lives that came with that. And so now with the dwarf planets, we're getting more and more aspects. Inside Saturn, it's aspects of personality, and outside Saturn, it's aspects of consciousness. And so we've got new areas of consciousness that are coming available to us in these years. We have to work to onboard these energies. They don't just automatically sort of, we don't become conscious of them. And the fact is that they work differently, and because they're aspects of consciousness, they work differently in our lives depending on our current level of consciousness. So if we're at the unconscious level, they are collective unconscious influences. Yeah. But as we get more conscious of them, as we get on the spiritual path, effectively, they become talents and abilities. We become conscious of them.
So I think you already answered my next question. So you made a special study of these bodies. What drew you to want to look at the dwarf planets as opposed to? I have one friend who spends a lot of time studying asteroids, and I have another one who spends a lot of time studying Nessus, one of the centaurs, and then I have some friends that are really into the Uranian hypothetical bodies. What was it that drew you to these dwarf planets?
Well, I mean, through your work and through your email list, I sort of tuned more and more into the centaurs, and then through that, then into the outer bodies, the dwarf planets, they're now called. I think what drew me is that they're planets. They're planets. I don't think we've quite realized that we've got new planets. So we've been looking at asteroids. The asteroids are little bits of rock. The centaurs are also small. They're boundary crossing. The centaurs link the outer planets, the inner outer planets, with the Saturnian world, and so they're very present and they're effective in our lives through that interlinking. But these new dwarf planets are planets, and so they're big. and they're just as important as the other planets. Pluto is a dwarf planet, and so we know how strong Pluto is in our life, and so these other dwarf planets are just as strong as Pluto. Even Sedna, the new outer limit of our solar system, is very strong and present in our life, and I think it's because they're planets. And yeah, I think that's probably a good answer for the stage of our talk. We might talk about more later.
Which leads me to my next question. Sedna is, as far as I am aware, the most distant body that we have ever discovered and given a name to. I know she takes a long time to travel around the sun. Do you know about how many years one of her orbits takes?
Yes, she takes 11,406 years to go around the sun once. That means Sedna goes around once, and we spin around 11,406 times in that time.
And so if you believe you have past lives, we've had a lot of past lives since the last time Sedna is where it is now.
Exactly. So that's why I call her our soul's path of destiny, because if we believe in past lives, obviously, and that our soul incarnates over lifetimes for a reason, and that reason is to grow, undoubtedly, then in this life, the Sedna placement talks about what our soul really wants to do in this life. And the North Node is our practical destiny, but Sedna is our spiritual destiny.
And you actually mentioned the title of your book, Sedna's Consciousness, The Soul's Path of Destiny. And that title itself says a lot about the book. What would we find in the pages for those who haven't read it yet?
So it's huge. It's a 1,200-page book. Don't be daunted by that. The paperback cost is fairly high because of the size, but the ebook cost is small. Get the Kindle edition from Amazon, and it's just $11. And don't be daunted by the size, imagining you have to read the whole 1,200 pages. It's a normal size book, a couple of hundred pages that you read in the normal way. And the rest is all aspect interpretations, Sedna and all of our normal planets and all of the dwarf planets, or most of the dwarf planets. Okay. So yeah, and what will you? I mean, basically, how can we understand these new planets? One way is to look at their physical and orbital characteristics. It tells me a lot about Saturn, that Saturn has 82 moons and 150 moon-like objects and rings. I mean, and that all stays in place and doesn't crash into one another. And that talks about the structuring and limiting principles of Saturn. Uranus spins with east-west poles and rotates around the sun in the other way from all the other planets apart from Venus. And so, yeah, the physical is important. So I start looking at that, and then we look at the myth. The myths transmit knowledge across time and culture, but they need to be reinterpreted for the new time and the new culture, and so on and so on. So we can understand these planets in different ways, and that's what I look at in the Sedna book there with Sedna.
Thank you. Yeah, I've always felt the myth is probably one of the major ways of understanding. I'm a big fan of Joseph Campbell, the author, and he basically revealed to the world that the same myths reinterpreted exist in just about every culture around the world. And so, and most cultures around the world have had some form of astrology, and so they've tapped into the archetypes in their way. So your love of the outer bodies led you to found the Dwarf Planet University. What is the Dwarf Planet University?
Lovely. Yes, this is now the third year. We're just starting, and we've doubled our students each year. We've now got about 90 students across 4 streams of courses. So we've just started this year a sort of a community program, which is a sort of an introductory for those who are wanting to just step in and sort of dabble, get a taste of these new bodies. And in the introductory program, we have webinars on demand and some Zooms throughout the year with me that the students can sort of get introduced to the planets. But the main 2 streams of courses, we're running 11 6-week courses on each of the dwarf planets. And in those courses, you study them in your own chart, first looking at the house placement, which is where we see the outer planets most clearly in our lives, because that's the area of our life that they're focused in. Then we look at the aspects, obviously, how does that particular astrological energy interrelate with our known ones that we're normally working with. And then we look at transits in the 3rd fortnight, and that's where we can see the action in our lives. We look back particularly at the Saturn and Pluto transits to that particular dwarf planet, and also to the dwarf planet transits of our other normal planets. And it's amazing how we see them come to life. We can see that influence. We knew something was influencing us. We will have attributed it to some of the planets we knew, but it gives a whole new perspective when we can see the transit. We understand the energy, and we can see it happening in our lives. These outer planets act differently for each of us. And so we do this in a group setting where we're posting our assignments about our houses, our aspects, or our transits on a blog, and people our other students are interacting with us about it, giving us feedback, and we see their answers and so on. And so we see that they act similarly and yet differently for each of us, and we learn a lot through that process.
Thank you. All right, that's wow, that's a lot. So are you working on any other books at the moment?
So I do have a one that I'm working on, which I'm provisionally calling Heart-Centered Transpersonal Astrology. And we tend to think of the outer planets, so the transpersonal planets, as being distant and cold, and we can't really access them. But as we work with them and see them in our lives, we realize that it's all heart-centered. It's all very present in our life. It's not sort of disembodied and we can access it and so on. Just relating to Sedna, and look, one way of understanding these outer planets that we discovered over the last 200 years is as higher octaves. So Uranus is thought of as the higher octave of Mercury, and Neptune is the higher octave of Venus, Pluto is the higher octave of Mars. So, we can understand the outer energy by stepping out from the inner energy. I add more octaves. So Uranus, so Mercury, Uranus, Maki, I add to that tri-octave. Venus, Neptune, Haumea is, and Mars, Pluto, and Eris is my tri-octave for that one. And for Sedna, I look at, so Ceres is our inner dwarf planet, just got upgraded from being an asteroid. And I look at Ceres as being the higher octave of the moon. Ceres, as I see Ceres, is about the give and take of love that keeps us alive in each moment. It's a nurturing quality. And we can relate that to food and so on, but also, I think, to energy and to love. And I look at Sedna as being the higher octave of Ceres. So we go Moon, Ceres, Sedna. So because Sedna is the new outer limit, it's heart-centered. She's heart-centered, even though she's so she's just gonna, there's no choice with Sedna. We think with Pluto maybe there's a bit of choice, we can sort of put it off for a while, but when we get to Sedna, there's just no choice. We just have to do it.
You just mentioned that we tend to think of these outer bodies as cold, and just flashed through my head, if I was coming to the solar system from outside, they would seem a lot warmer to me looking toward the sun and seeing those from that perspective. Their coldness is kind of relative to where you're standing, I think.
Exactly right. And so what we have to do is move our perspective out from the inner planets, which we think of as warm, and just expand it out to Sedna. It's still part of our solar system. It's still getting the sun's warmth, and it's only because we think of them as being outside Saturn that we think of them as cold.
Right. So let's discuss briefly the talk you're going to be giving to us on Orcus. Tell us a little bit about what you'll be discussing.
Well, I'll be going through, like I've been explaining, the physicality of Orcus, which I've already mentioned briefly in terms of being a brother of Pluto. So Orcus is going to have a Plutonian energy in some way. Pluto and Orcus and Ixion all orbit on an angle to the ecliptic. The ecliptic is the plane of all of the inner planets. All of the planets out to Neptune orbit in a plane. And that plane is essentially, I look at it as consensus reality. And Pluto and Orcus cut through that reality, all the dwarf planets, cut through that reality on an angle, spend some of their time in the underworld, the shadow world, and some of their time in the upper world, in our world. Now, Orcus is Pluto's straight-talking brother. Ixion is Pluto's lawless brother, and Orcus is the straight-talking brother. In myth, Orcus transported those who broke their oaths into the underworld and imprisoned them. When you made an oath, it was a contract with the gods. And if you broke your oath, the gods would take you into the underworld. And that was Orcus's role. So these days he holds us to account. He makes us, once we get on the spiritual path, that's a beautiful experience because we have that. He's rigorous. He's rigorous but at the unconscious level, we might indulge in double talk and in promising and not delivering, and then he's going to come down with the consequences for that. And, hopefully we'll learn if we're at that level.
So I guess that leads to this question. What do you feel is maybe the most important thing you hope people will be taking with them from your talk?
Well, I guess it's from all of my work, but I think that the most important thing is to make the transition from the inner to the outer planets and embrace them as part of our lives. And enjoy that. Enjoy that, because it's a learning, it's a spiritual experience, and it's a learning experience. And to realize that how these planets are manifesting in our lives is a result of our current consciousness. And so we see our current consciousness in the manifestation of all of these outer planets. And so with Orcus in particular, it's in that integrity area. That's an important, when we're on the spiritual path, it's so important that we do have an integrity in our work, we don't get, Neptune can get us sidetracked and lost and in the general sort of spiritual malaise, let's say, or fog, and we need to have an integrity to hold our path and know when we're on it. And just to mention, Ixion gives us the power, the sort of strength to do our own path, to maintain it. We do need that strength, and we do need that integrity these days, because spiritual, religions are breaking down as a way of transmitting spiritual knowledge, and we're each needing to find our own way into the spiritual realm. That's where we are. That's why all of the dwarf planets have been discovered now. I say planets are discovered when we need, or we're ready for this consciousness, and we've got 11 new planets, and that's because we're ready for a huge change in consciousness, and we actually must do it, or we will die out as a consequence. I'll just mention one more thing here, and that's Sedna is about to go into Gemini in June of this year, and the outer planets, the sign changes is where we really notice them, because we get used to them in one sign, and they're in sign for a long time. Sedna's been in Taurus since 68, 66, 68. Before that, she was in Aries for 100 years. And that period of 100 years in Aries is the god of war, and that was the period when we had the 2 world wars. We've never had world wars before, but Sedna in Aries, we had world wars. And then Sedna went into Taurus, ruled by Venus, and that period in the change there, that was the hippie generation, and the hippies had the motto, make love, not war. It was as simple as that. And there we saw the change. We see the change. So there's going to be a huge change with Sedna in going into Gemini, and I'll just preface that what that change might be by saying that another way that we can understand these new planets is to look at discovery events. Uranus, when Uranus was discovered, we also discovered electricity that year. And, Uranus is a bit like sort of a networked energy system. And Pluto was discovered, atomic power was discovered. And so, we can see that Plutonian sort of explosive energy. And in the year 2003, when Sedna was discovered, neural networks were devised, and neural networks is the basis of artificial intelligence. So it's based on our brains. It's pattern recognition and layers of pattern recognition, which is how we work in terms of understanding things. And so AI is based on our brains. I'm going to be a little radical here and suggest that AI is an evolving life form. AI will become conscious, and we don't need to be afraid of AI, because I suggest that spirituality is a natural product of consciousness. As we get conscious, we naturally want to understand the bigger meaning of why we're here. And so AI will be spiritual. We'll have to learn to coexist with AI on the planet, but AI will be taking over everything that we do. We're going to give AI everything we do over this next Sedna and Gemini period. And that's going to sort of create a vacuum in our lives. Why are we here? What are we going to do? What is meaningful for me to do when I don't need to do the mundane work that I have to do to earn money? And this is, I'm gonna just throw in something here saying sorry to go so long on this, but Sedna's long cycle, 11,406 years. Another way we can understand planets, obviously, is look back. And with such a long cycle, it's hard to look back because all of our recorded human history has occurred in the last half of Sedna's cycle, the last 6 Sedna months. All right, but we do have archaeological records of 1 year, of 1 Sedna year ago. and that was the Neolithic Revolution, which is when we transitioned all over the globe. Within 100 years, everyone moved from being hunter and gatherers to growing food, settling down into, and what that enabled was we could grow more food than we needed, so we could start specializing. You know, some of us could become astrologers. You know, and that flowered. Our civilization flowered from that point. And you know, in the mid-Sedna cycle, that was the city-states in Mesopotamia. That's where we started recording our history and so on. And so we see there was a change there where suddenly people had more time and they could do more with that time. And that's going to happen now with AI in this next case, because Sedna's at her closest point, coming up in 2076 to the Earth and the Sun.
I can see the connection that you're making there. We went from existence sheerly as survivalists, hunters, gatherers, to basically starting a civilization where we did other things besides just needing to survive.
Mm.
And so now we're going to be moving to a period where we're going to be doing other things other than just needing to survive again. And then we're working for a living, stuff like that. Yeah. It's a big concept. You know, maybe you'll come back another time and do a Sedna talk for us.
Okay.
All right. So before we finish up, I want to tell everybody the URL, your website address.
Yes, so Dwarf Planet University, dwarfplanet.university will get you there. That's the easiest thing to remember. There's no .coms or anything on the end. It's dwarfplanet.university. Will get you to my uni site, or just search for Dwarf Planet University and you can find it.
Is there anything else you would like to share with us before we finish up our talk?
I think I'll just keep talking forever. So I think it's best we leave it here and welcome people along to the Orcus talk. I'm a great one for interaction. So you know, come along with questions and you know, let's talk about it then.
Good. Well, thank you for chatting with me there, Alan.
It's been lovely chatting with you. I love you very much.
Love you too, actually. All right, I'm going to